Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you again for the joyful conversation we had before we started. I want to share something with you that I saw yesterday, and it may even be why this title of this talk came to me last night. But yesterday morning, I went down to a park by the river here in Rock Hill, and joined a group of photographers from Rock Hill area. And they kind of meet out on a patio outside a coffee shop down there. Now, this park is not completely rural. It's a combination of walking trails and residential apartments and businesses and homes, and it's kind of like a little community into itself. So we were sitting on a patio, and it was in the shade, and there was a breeze kind of coming through the alley that we were in, and it was very delightful. We were all sitting there just kind of getting to know one another. But all around us, everywhere around us, the people were coming alive. They were coming awake. There were people out there walking the trail. I think it's about a 4-mile trail. The people were walking. There were people who were jogging, and sweating profusely as they were running in the heat. It must have been like 80-something degrees even at 9 o'clock in the morning. There was these they're like golf carts, but they carry 8 or 10 people. You see them used at resorts, and there are a couple of tubing companies down there that rent people tubes and take them from one end of the river to the other. And they were shuttling people back and forth, and there were families out strolling. And the thing that I want to tell you about is this one young family that came right up where we were sitting. I guess they had enough of the heat, and they came into the shade to kind of sit down on the raised planters that they had around where we were. And it was a mom and a dad with a stroller, and they had a little toddler, a precious little girl. It looked like maybe 18 months old, maybe 2 years old, And they had a basset hound, big old basset hound. And of course, it caught my attention for 2 reasons. The first is we had basset hounds. Our kids had basset hounds years ago. But the second reason was that the mom was carrying the toddler, and the dad was pushing the stroller, and the basset hound was just sitting in the stroller, with the big basset hound eyes, just kind of looking there, And I laughed because we had raised them, and I said, it laid down on you, didn't it? And they just smiled, because basset hounds have a way of doing that. You take them for a walk, and when they've had enough, they just stop. They just lay down. There's nothing you can do to move them. There's absolutely nothing. They just lay there. Even if it's the middle of the road, they'll let cars go around them. They're just like a speed bump. And the mom laughed, and she said, she said, the baby's lighter than the basset hound, so we put the basset hound in the stroller, and I carry the baby until we can get someplace where the dog can cool off. And I thought, how precious is that? What a precious moment. Just here's all life going on around us. Here's all of these things going on around us. There's all of these people sitting there talking about cameras and places they've been and places they've taken pictures and all these kind of things. And in the midst of that, there's this truly, for me, a precious moment. I wish I had my camera with me. I didn't take it to the meeting. I wish I had my camera with me, and I could have taken a picture of that scene, of this big old basset hound just sitting in the stroller like it belonged there, I can just imagine if the basset hound was thinking and said, okay, well, now it's my turn to ride, get the baby out of there. I'm going to go for a ride now. So this leads us to, it is a wonder-filled life, with apologies to Frank Capra and this famous movie that we get to see every Christmas. I think it's a Turner Classic Movie, or somebody just plays it over and over and over again. It's a Wonderful Life. And I think we all know the plot, if not the dialogue word for word. Jimmy Stewart, of course, is the protagonist. He's the main character of the movie. And we start out, I guess the best way to say it is, we start out and he's kind of in a rut. He's wondering if his life is really worth it. He's thinking about has he even made a difference in this town that he lives in? And he's contemplating jumping off the bridge into the icy river. And this angel appears, but he's not the type of angel that we we normally expect, with feathers and wings and things like that. He's just kind of a whimsical old man named Clarence, but he's the angel. And Clarence's job is to take Jimmy Stewart's character around and show him that life is wonderful. It is a wonderful life. And it is wonderful because of his contribution, that he has touched many lives in the town. And of course, by the end of the movie, Jimmy Stewart now comes back home, goes back to his home, and he's changed. And this is the typical plot of the hero story. This is the typical plot of a movie. He's changed. He's right back where he was, but he's not the same person. He's changed. And now he can see that in the midst of everything that was going on around him, everything that he thought was terrible before, all of the struggle, all of the greed, all of these other things, that if he just looks a little bit harder, if he just focuses his attention, if he just observes the good instead of the bad, that he can find it. It's there. It's a wonderful life. Now, like any story that lasts and for as long as this one has, there's something in it that we all can relate to. There's something that we look at and we identify with the main character. We become the protagonist in the movie. We become the hero in the action movies and things like that. We kind of get into it. What would I do in this situation and all those things? But I think the reason that the movie touches our heart is that each and every one of us has probably gone through an experience like that, where we started to wonder, is the Peggy Lee song, is that all there is? Is that all there is to life? Then let's just keep dancing. Let's just break out the booze and have a ball. There's nothing more. And we kind of wonder, what is this? What is this thing called life? Who am I? Why am I here? What is it all about? And the way that we can move out of that rut, if you want to call it a rut, or that stuckness, or that feeling sad that sometimes we go through, is to deliberately cause ourselves to focus on the wonder, to bring ourselves to the point of stopping, and in the midst of the hustle and the bustle and all of the other things that are going on in life, to find the good, to look for it. It is there. And unlike the movie, we don't have to be at our wit's end and ready to end it all, and we don't need anyone else to do it for us. We don't need an angel named Clarence or anyone else to come and do it for us, because in truth, we are the only ones who can do it for ourselves. We are the only ones. So Joseph Campbell took things a little bit further in his explaining the plot of the hero's journey in its universal appeal, because this is each and every one of us. You see, each and every one of us, we identify something that ought to be done, that we want to do, and we think that we have to go off on this journey and meet all these other people and go through all these trials and tribulations in order to find the answer that we're seeking. And eventually we return back home and we find out that the answer was within us all along. And we are right back where we started, but we are not the same people. We are different people. And then, because we have taken this inner journey, because we have gone within, and we have found that which we were seeking, see, then the hero that is us, then the hero has something more, something of value to give back to its community. This is the story. As in after the Civil War, the gentleman wrote the little pamphlet Acres of Diamonds, and it was very similar. The man was looking for diamonds, and he went and he searched the whole world and couldn't find them, and he came back home, and there they were in his backyard. Of course, it's a metaphor. That which we are seeking is already here. That which we are seeking is within. It is not without. So today we want to talk a little bit about wonder and joy. And isn't that what we are really seeking in our lives? There's a book called The Art of Happiness that, if you see it, it has a picture of the Dalai Lama on the cover. And it says, by the Dalai Lama, and it has an American author's name. But it's really by the American author. And it's about his interviews with the Dalai Lama. And I found it most interesting because this was a Western mind trained in psychiatry who figured that the Tibetan Buddhists have been studying human psychology for over 1,000 years now. And perhaps they could give him some insights. So he went and he finally got an audience with the Dalai Lama. And he asked the Dalai Lama, he said, what do you think motivates people? Why do people do what they do? And the Dalai Lama laughed and shook his head and said, you're asking me? I don't know. How would I know, And the guy was a little taken aback, and he says, but, he says, you're the head of the Tibetan Buddhist. You've been studying human psychology much longer than the West has, and I thought for sure if anybody had a clue, it would be you. And the Dalai Lama had a very simple answer. He said, he says, I think most people just want to be happy. And they're doing the things that they're doing because somehow they think it is going to bring themselves happiness. Somehow it's going to bring them happiness. And the secret of life, this is very simple. Write it down. Put it on an index card. Tape it to your dashboard. The secret of life is simply this then. Find out what makes you happy. Do more of it. And find out what doesn't make you happy. And do less of it. And that was it. That was it. The rest of the book kind of expands on that whole idea, but that was it. And I thought, how beautiful and how simple. And I remembered something that Emmett Fox wrote some years ago when he was writing about the Sermon on the Mount or the Ten Commandments. He had 2 books, but each by those 2 titles. And he said it's amazing how you can read something that is profound like a line of scripture, and it encapsulates everything that it needed to encapsulate in 1 or 2 sentences. And then you give that same line of scripture to a preacher, and it takes pages and pages and pages to explain. And Emmett Fox says, when you really understand it, when you really have it, it's succinct, it's easy, it's there. So let's keep this in mind, at least for today and hopefully for the rest of our lives. What we are seeking is this thing called happiness. And the secret is to find out what brings us happiness and do more, and what doesn't, and do that less. Now, having said that, if you think about the joy, if you think about happiness, if you think about the motivation for life, there's a couple things that we want to look at. And the first is, let's go back and look at the children. Let's go back, in the Christian scripture it says, come to me as little children. Come to me as little children. Well, what does that mean? There was a sect, I think it was in the 1600s, of people who took that literally, and they were adults, and they would just play all day. They would go out and do a little bit of work in the fields, but then they would play all day. They would build swing sets big enough for adults. They would play Ring Around the Rosie. They would do all of the things that children do. To take that line literally, come to me as little children, be like the little children. And if you look at little children, they tend to find the wonder. They tend to find the wonder in life. They tend to find that which is magnificent and wonderful. And they see it in the most ordinary things, the most ordinary things. Give a small child the flower, the one that you blow on and all the petals come off, and let them play with that. And it's just amazing, Go to the store and buy a little bottle of bubble stuff with a wand, and just soap bubbles that they can blow through, and they can make bubbles, and they can watch them float away. And they're just amazed and mesmerized by that, And if you watch them, they will tend to gravitate towards the things that bring them happiness, the things that are awe-inspiring. I was waiting for an airplane one time in an airport, and it was very early in the morning. I was coming in from the West Coast, and the flights land on the East Coast sometimes before the airports, before the passenger concourses are open, So I landed at this airport and got into the passenger concourse, and nothing was open. No place to get a cup of coffee or a sandwich or anything. The people were still in the aisles buffing the floors and those kind of things. And I went down to the gate for my connecting flight, and I just sat there and waited as this terminal started to come to life around me. And there was a family. There was a family of people. It looked like grandparents, and then their daughter, and then a little granddaughter, a little girl, maybe about 5 years old. And they were waiting for the plane. Everybody was sleepy, everybody had been flying all night. Everybody was kind of just wanted to get wherever we were going so we could get out of our clothes and get a hot shower and get the travel crud off of us and those kind of things. And this little one was just happy. She was just happy. She was just playing. She was going over to the window, and she was watching the sky as the sky grew lighter, till the sun came up. And oh, look at this, Grandma! Look at this, Grandpa! Or look at this, Mommy! And I was kind of dozing off. I had been awake. I had been awake for almost a day at that time, and was just kind of dozing off in my chair, just waiting for someplace with coffee to open up. And I heard her voice shout out in very excited terms. She just shouted out, "Oh, look, free air, free air!" I said, "I got to see this." And I looked, and she had just taken a piece of loose leaf paper, and folded it into a little fan. How we used to make the paper fans and fan ourselves when we were kids. And she took this little piece of paper, and she had folded it into a fan, and she was going around, and she was fanning, her mommy and then each of her grandparents one at a time, and then she'd fan herself, and she was just very happy that she had this little fan. I thought, how precious is that? Here we are, all the adults are just kind of worn out and stiff and sore and feeling dirty and waiting for some coffee and just want to get where we're going, and this little one is fully alive in the moment, just fully alive in the moment. And what did it take for her to express her happiness? A piece of paper, a piece of paper. That was it, just a piece of paper. So the point is that the happiness is simple, the happiness is easy. It doesn't have to be hard, it doesn't have to be elaborate. It's the expression of the joy that is already there. But first we must observe that joy. First we must find that joy. Like Jimmy Stewart, we have to go around and convince ourselves, oh my goodness, it's there. I've been looking past it. See, I haven't been seeing it. And part of what we run into is you have, or we all have in front of us, almost two things that seem to be the opposite. And they're not really, they just seem to be the opposite, And that is the way of the world, the way of humanity, the way of civilization, and then we have the way of the soul. And the way of the world is telling us one thing, and the way of the soul, the way of the great spiritual teachers of the different traditions pretty much say the same things. They will tell you that happiness doesn't come from the externals, but happiness is an inside job. Wonder is an inside job. The way of the world tells us that if you work hard and if you get more stuff, And if you rise to a position of power and you can have yachts and all of these things, then you will be happy. Then you will be happy. And we have to remember that human beings made those rules. Human beings made that up. This is almost like a shared delusion, if you want to call it that. You know, who said so? Who said so? Who made that rule? I always love that. You know, ask that one question. Well, who made that rule? Why is that a rule? Who made that? Who made that rule? So we have to look at worldviews. I think we have to understand that human consciousness kind of surrounds itself or collects itself or gathers itself, maybe is a better word, around worldviews. So we tend to have a way of explaining the world or understanding the world or thinking about the world. And then we try to take all of the evidence that goes with our worldview and we try to collect that. And we try to say, see, you know, the worldview is right because we have this evidence. And then we ignore other worldviews. We say, well, they're wrong, so we don't need to pay attention to them. In fact, we won't even look at any of the evidence they have. They're just completely wrong. So the worldview, wherever you grow up, whenever you grow up, the worldview that is predominant kind of affects the way society believes things ought to be, believes things should be. And then the people within that worldview, the people within that society, they make rules and regulations and laws and organizations and structures and businesses and taxes and money and all of those things. They make all of those things in a manner that conforms with their worldview. That's what they do. That's what people have always done. That's what people are doing now. So we kind of live in a worldview, and we live in a worldview that has created a system to support itself that pretty much tells us you have to work hard. Pretty much tells us that happiness comes from achieving. Happiness comes from doing something. Happiness comes from gaining something. Happiness comes from accumulating something. Now, if you try to put this in terms of the 7 chakra system of the East, right, and just consider the chakras as being an energy center or a point of focus, a point of attention. What is it that we are giving our attention to? And Maslow took these and he put them into his hierarchy of needs, and they became very popular, but they existed for a long time before Maslow reinterpreted them and put them into a language that we were capable of understanding. So our first need is to survive, right? The root chakra. We have to live. We have to have food. We have to have water. We have to have safety. We have to have security. And if we don't have that, that's where our attention goes. That's what we want to. That's what we will struggle for to survive. And then the next one comes with procreation or expansion. Now, in simplest terms of a species, it's reproduction. But in terms of, for example, a business, or in terms of finances, it's about getting more. It's about expanding. It's about getting more. And then the third energy center is about power and control, about willpower. It is about then exerting our influence over others, about kind of bending other people to our will. And this, if you look at the world about us, this is pretty much where the world rotates, or you know, in the cultures, in the societies. This is where it spins, you know. In terms of regular human life, then, in terms of like ordinary life, you and I, everyday life, what happens to us is we're kind of stuck in that expansion mode and that power and control mode. You know, we're not really so much, our survival is not so much threatened. However, if you look at what the politicians will tell us, and if you look at what the fearmongers will tell us, it is, because that is the way that they maintain their control, right? They stir up fear and then tell people, you know, if you elect me or you give me what I want, I will make your fear go away. I think I told you about the Jayhawkers, the movie with Fess Parker and Jeff Chandler, where it's all about just that. You know, one night these bad guys run right in a town and they shoot the whole town up, and the next night Jeff Chandler rides in with the good guys and says, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm a day late, but if you give me your money and you give me food and you give me all these things and you promise your allegiance to me, I'll make sure that never happens again. I'll leave some of my men behind to protect me." And as the movie goes on, you find out that there's only one group of men. Jeff Chandler's men are both the bad guys and the good guys. They ride in one night, scare everybody to death, and they ride in the next night, and the people willingly give their power away to them. So even though in reality most of us are not struggling for enough to eat, for things like that, there are people who can stir up fear, who will stir up fear, which keeps us focused at that first chakra. But then when it comes to the second one, what we're stuck in is this rut of there's never enough. You know, if I had $1 million, well, you know, that would be pretty good. But if I had $2 million, well, that would be better. And you know, maybe if I had 10, that would be better still. You can see this in the enormous salaries that the top athletes get. You know, an athlete may be making an astronomical salary compared to what you and I understand and are used to. And they're quite happy with that. In fact, they've got more money than they could possibly spend, or reasonably spend, let me put it that way, the rest of their life. If they would take that $200 million a year salary and just invest it, they would have more than enough. And they think that's fine until a player next to him gets $225 million. And then suddenly $200 million isn't enough, you see. Well, it's not about the money, it's about the principle. You see, they're paying him more than they're paying me, kind of thing. So there's this constant craving for more. There's this constant, call it grasping. The Buddhists call it grasping. At our beginning stages of our growth, we go through grasping and aversion. We want to get something that we don't have. We want to reach out there and grab something that is outside of us, and we believe that if we get that somehow we are going to be happy. And we want to avoid the unpleasantness, the things that we don't really want to do. And we think through grasping and through aversion, we think that we are going to be happy, because happiness is what we are seeking. But what we eventually find out is they don't. If I had 10 million, it wouldn't be enough. I'd want 20. And if I had 20, I'd want 40. And if I wanted 40, then I would sit and worry about what would happen if the markets collapsed and I lost that. And what we find is that with all of our grasping and all of our aversion and all of our clinging and all of our trying to bring things from out there to us, we find emptiness. We find emptiness. Life lacks meaning for us. Is that all there is? Those sorts of things. So that is where the worldview in which we live, that is where it is. And you have to keep in mind that worldview came to us from a culture that grew up in a harsh environment. The Caucasus Mountains, the deserts of the Middle East, those kind of things. And it became easy for people to believe that life is a struggle, life needs to be a struggle, and therefore in order to succeed at life you need to figure out how to win at this game of struggle. Now, of course, the other worldview comes to us from cultures that grew up in what we would call paradise, into the lush tropics, or Tahiti, for example, or someplace like that. Just as an aside, I was listened to an interview on the radio of a man who wrote a book about navigators. Super Navigators is the name of the book. David Barry, B-A-R-R-I-E, is the author. And he was talking about not only human beings and how human beings navigate, but he was talking about how the animals navigate. How do they find their way, very fascinating. I've ordered the book from the library. But the one point he was talking about, how did the people get to Tahiti? How did human beings get to Tahiti or to any of the islands in the Pacific Ocean that by the time the Europeans got there, the islands were already populated? Well, what was it? What was it about the people, How did they find their way there? And in some cases, they just followed the birds. The birds would migrate from island to island, and the people knew that the birds were going somewhere, and they flew pretty much in a straight line. So they followed them. They followed them there. But here when the Europeans arrived in paradise were people who had more than enough. Their society had more than enough to eat. They lived in a lush environment. There was fruit on the trees. There was fish in the lagoon. And there was rainwater. The weather was kind. They had everything they need. And also, if you think of the lush jungles of India, where we get Hinduism and Buddhism from. Different worldview entirely. A different worldview entirely. See, life is not supposed to be a struggle. Life is about happiness. Life is about fulfillment. Now, Michael Beckwith, I don't know if he invented the term or just used it, but he used to talk about fulfillment. Fulfillment. So we're stuck in the idea that once we can grab enough stuff out there and bring it in to fill us up, then we're going to be happy. We will be fulfilled. But that's not the way it works. We have to be full. We have to find that within ourselves. We have to go within and we have to find that. And then we have to give it. Then we have to give it. And then we feel fulfillment. So the second worldview, the spiritual view, then, if you want to look at it, we kind of get a different understanding of it when we look at people who grew up in a less harsh environment. Right? So for the people who grew up in a harsh environment, life is a test. Life is a struggle. You need to pass, or else you're going to go suffer for eternity, kind of thing. See, and then every day of life is a struggle, and every day of life is a test, and every day of life is trying to make sure that you don't break any of the rules. But the different view is that life is a joy. Life is a wonder. Life is a celebration of itself. And rather than going through life filled with fear, filled with greed, trying to get more, all those kind of things, that life is about happiness. Life is about happiness. So we can kind of look at that and say, yeah, well, okay, I understand that, but how do I do that? How do I get there? So this brings us to one of my favorite little books. It's on the internet, Florence Scovel Shinn, The Game of Life and How to Play It. And she says, life is a game of boomerangs. Life is like a game of boomerangs. Right? It's not a test. It's not a trial. It's a game. It's a game to be played. Right? It's not a struggle to win. It's not a battle to win. It's not imposing our will on other people. It's a game of joy. It's a game to be played for joy. A total shift, right? A total shift away from the worldview that our culture gives to us. I hope you understand by now that we have to be careful as we listen to things. Did that come from the human worldview? The worldview that's invested in struggle, in pain, in suffering? If so, I don't want to listen to it. Dr. Holmes tells us that the human mind struggles to free itself from the burdens of race consciousness and the wrong ideas that race consciousness has adopted over the millennia. But that's what we must do. We must free ourselves from that. And what Florence Scovel Shinn tells us is, what we give out, we get back. What we give out, we give back. We get back. New Testament says, cast your bread upon the waters, and eventually they will return unto you. What you give out, you get back. So this idea then that I'm sharing today, this idea of being our own Clarence, being our own angel, being the one who can guide our own self to see the good that was already there, but we looked beyond because we were so caught up in the worldview of struggle that we can't, and we are the only ones who can. We can start to use wonder and joy as a compass and as a tool to unlock the happiness that is within us. So think about how many hours a day we spend invested in and caught up in just all of the activities of making a living and doing the things that we need to do. And while we're doing that, we're not necessarily feeling the joy. Now we could feel the joy. We could see the joy. We could be like Jimmy Stewart at the end of the movie. But I think many times we're not. We're just so caught up in doing, and getting things done. You know, work is doing things that you don't want to do to get the money, so that when you're not working, you can do what you do want to do. That's kind of the attitude that we live in this society. But if we can deliberately, consciously choose to bring ourselves to the point of finding the joy, of seeing the wonder, of stopping to notice, is that Dad pushing a basset hound in a stroller? Did I really see that? Oh my goodness! But there's a story there. You see, there's a wonderful story there. There's a precious moment there. But we have to bring ourselves to it. So we can do it through our intentions. Remember, a few weeks ago I was talking about the importance of your intentions and paying attention to your intentions. Can we wake up in the morning and say to ourselves, today I intend to live in and see and celebrate the wonder and the awe of life? As I breathe in, see, this is why breath is used in meditation. As I breathe in, do I feel my connection with all of life? As I exhale, can I see the gift that I am giving back to the trees? As we take a drink of water, you know, absolutely necessary. I mean, think of your life, physical. Think of your physical life, and what is the thing that you need most to live, or the most important thing to live? And that would be the air that you breathe. Because if you did not have the air that you breathe within 4 minutes, more or less, you'd be dead. Yet we never think about it. We never tend to worry about it. But we never stop to think of how wonderful it is. What if you and I had to, through the power of our intellect and our will, what if you and I had to explain to our lungs how to take the oxygen out of the air and put the carbon dioxide back in it? See, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. We don't know. I'm sure somewhere in a laboratory somewhere, excuse me, in a classroom somewhere, there are scientists who understand it, but even in understanding it, they cannot compel the lung to do their bidding. And yet the most important part of your life has already been taken care of for you. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? The second thing that you need is water. You can go a couple weeks without food, but without a few days of water, you're going to be in deep trouble. And look at how abundant it is. Look at how easy it is. It comes in the form of rain. Now, if you or I had to sit here and try to make it rain, do you think we could do that? If we had to sit here and try to compel the hydrogen and the oxygen to combine together to make water so we could drink, could we do that? Well, maybe if you put me in a laboratory again and give me a couple of electrodes, I might be able to create a reaction where I could make a drop of water or two, but not in the abundance required for life. And yet here it is. Yet here it is. And then food. And then food. Of course, shelter's in there. Shelter's in there somewhere. But food. We need to eat. And I want you to think of this, what I call a miracle. The tiny blade of grass. Tiny blade of grass. You know, we'll go out every week or so and mow the lawn, and it grows back up again. Yet that tiny blade of grass feeds the world in its different forms. As grass, it feeds the animals that give us our milk. But as rice, it feeds millions of people. As corn, it feeds millions of people. And as wheat, it feeds millions of people. So this tiny, simple blade of grass has evolved to take a form that is appropriate for its climate and feed the world. A tiny little blade of grass. Isn't that wonderful? So one of the best things that I can suggest, one of the best ways that we can open our eyes up to the wonder of life, see? And then we are giving out wonder and awe, and we are getting back wonder and awe, is gratitude. Is gratitude. See, to me, gratitude is recognizing the presence and the activity of God in the situation. In the situation. And if we can just stop and stop at those little things that we take for granted, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, right, the cars that we drive, our ability to interact with each other, our ability to be useful and to be helpful and to be kind to each other. If we just stop at that and say, isn't it wonderful? I am so grateful to be here, to have the ability to observe this, to participate in this, and to live in this moment, in this life, as God's instrument of loving kindness. So what happens is, like the character in the movie, what we have done, or what we can do, is we can go on this sort of magical, mystical journey within. We can bring ourselves to the point of seeing that the wonder, the joy, the kindness, and the love is already here, even in the midst of what appears to be crazy situations. Life is going to work itself out for the highest good. It always does. It always will. If we can learn to find that which is good within us, if we can activate that by recognizing the good that is already here, then we can go back into the mundane world, the 5 o'clock world, but we will be different people. We will have changed. We will be doing that which we have come here to do, which is to pursue happiness. But to pursue happiness as the spiritual teachers tell us, not as the material teachers tell us. To pursue happiness by going within, and admiring the magnificence of life and of love and of God. We can start in the morning. Before we run out the door and go to work, we can start in the morning by just blessing the day. And again, by blessing, it's like gratitude. Blessing to me is recognizing the activity and the presence of God in someone or something. If I say to you, God bless you, what I'm saying is I see the love of God in you. I feel the love of God in you. I experience the love of God as you. Can we bless everyone? Can we bless everything? Can we feel our connection to life? How magnificent is the sunrise? How beautiful is the sunset? How wonderful it is that I am here. Today, I am God's instrument of love and happiness, and I act accordingly. And I sprinkle a little bit of that love and that happiness on each and every one I meet, simply by being what I am. Love in action. It is a wonder-filled life, and you are its wonderful expression. I trust you can look in the mirror today and see that wonderfulness looking back at you. And so it is.